Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is Best Practices for Point of Sale Offline Databases, Dynamics 365 Commerce. My name is Tim, and I will be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you are agreeing to this experience. The recording will be made available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the session, and a live segment at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Scott Tucker and Harish Jayaprakash, Fast Track Solutions Architects, and Jarad Shannon, Senior Program Manager. Scott, over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. We're excited to present best practices for point-of-sale offline databases. The target audience today is project implementation team members and IT management responsible for the ongoing maintenance of the point-of-sale application. We won't be covering any extending the offline database topics today. So let's take a look at what we're going to discuss this morning. We're going to do a quick overview of the topic area, and then we'll jump into the configurations and features related to offline databases. Then we'll cover how to install SQL Express for the point-of-sale application with offline, and then the application installation itself. Then we'll wrap up with some topics on database size management, and then the ongoing maintenance of the offline databases. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to post them. We'll monitor the Q&A panel. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jarad to give the overview.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Let's go ahead and move forward and we'll dive right in. So the basic questions, of course, the who, when, where, why. Offline database in point of sale, and we say that generically because it encompasses both modern point of sale and the new sealed store commerce, which of course is functionally equivalent to modern point of sale, is that critical business continuity aspect to maintain the ability to transact. That's the most important criticality for us here, is that continuous store operation. So whether it be network failure, whether it be issues around the PC itself, whether it be issues in Azure, regardless of the scenario, the goal is to have an offline database in place so that transaction does not stop, that everything continues in terms of business continuity, which also hits that why. Talking about that known and unknown. It's one thing to have a network adapter go out or a network go down because of interruptions in service. There's also component failures and various other scenarios that sometimes just creep up. So having that fallback to offline is the most critical aspect. And this, of course, anytime during store operations, we've got customers across the board from 24/7 operations to seasonal. So it heavily depends, but regardless of it, the number one thing is you've got to be able to keep transacting. So that gets us finally to that how. And of course, Harish and Scott are going to talk about this in far more depth, but there's a variety of possibilities here between the concepts of manually offline switching, seamless offline switching, which is the more standard, and our more new focused feature sets around performance-based offline switching, where we try to be more proactive. Scott, we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. So what does the telemetry tell us? A quick query over the last 30 days, and we're talking about 91% of customers who have offline databases use the offline databases. And then from there, to really dive in, of all the offline databases that even exist, just in the last 30 days, we're talking about 41% of them going offline. That means that almost half of all point of sales at least have a moment of switching offline. So you got to validate that reliability of the network before truly making this determination, of course. But the point is, if we move one step, if you deploy it, it will be used. And that's what's critical. So we'll go from here just to have that kind of overarching review of data synchronization. Of course, Harish and Scott will dive into the very specifics of everything, but at a high level, it's really these blue lines that you see in this diagram, heading the concept of pulling that data from Azure, SQL Azure in through headquarters to generate packages that will go to that point of sale and get applied to the offline database. And this is where we have those CDX libraries in the actual app itself. And of course, Commerce Scale Unit, all the information is going up through that. So all your transactions that get put into that offline database while running will still go through your CSU. With that, we'll move one forward, and I will hand off to Harish to talk about configurations and features. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Jarad. Thanks, Scott, for moving there. So we quickly dive into some of the important offline features that we have released recently, or some of them are available as we speak today. First thing, we wanted to talk about the advanced offline feature. This feature consists of series of settings in the offline profile and in the HQ. These settings make additional offline switching scenarios, like giving the users an ability to switch to offline mode before they sign into POS. Also, it also allows the enhanced commerce headquarters availability testing, so that you can easily switch to offline mode and return to online status, somewhat related to what Jarad was talking about, the seamless switching, or you want to do a manual switch between offline and come back. So that's something that this advanced offline feature would enable you with. Now, the second one is about the offline status dashboard. This is something we released in 10.20, which shows the latest offline status and the errors and details of the database for each device that is part of your channel. So we will go a bit deeper in the upcoming slides, or in the session today. And the next one we wanted to talk about is the offline database compression. This feature is released very recently in 10.29, which enables the automated index compression outside of your channel store hours. If the store hours are not configured or not working properly, the compression will always occur throughout the day as well. So that's why the configuring your store hours is pretty key, so that it happens outside of your channel store hours operations. And when the compression occurs, whether based on the store hours or not, both the modern point of sale or the store commerce will query the offline database for the non-compressed and non-clustered indexes based on certain criteria, which Scott will go in detail in a while, of the total database size. And then it's primarily going to do the compression based on those parameters there. And the next feature that we want to touch base is on the POS Offline Database compression. This needs to be turned on for this in order for the offline database compression to work, and from the feature management, and then you need to run the 10.70 job, right? And the next one is primarily on the performance-based offline switching. This feature is released in 10.20, and it enables a point of sale device or the store commerce to switch to offline mode seamlessly when encountering any performance degradation from an outbound web request. So this also needs enabling advanced offline switching functionality from the offline profile in HQ, and the POS seamless offline performance degradation feature from a feature management as well. We'll talk about it later. And next, we'll quickly jump on to the configuration settings for the offline databases. So Scott, if we can move to the next one. So configuring some of the offline databases is pretty key in terms of managing your databases, right? Some of the features that we wanted to talk about, we'll go into details for each, but on the high level, we wanted to talk about the cleaning up relevant master data after the synchronization is done. And we wanted to talk about the enabling offline monitoring feature, which we talked earlier, and we'll just showcase you like what are the details that will be available when we go ahead and enabling this feature and what details that you can see from an HQ perspective. And there is a delayed download session creation. You can say delayed or the POS synchronization. We'll go in detail about it in a while. And there is a separate another one we wanted to talk about is the separate channel database group for offline database. I want to spend a bit of time over here. In general, our recommendation is to have one channel database from an online channel perspective, and then you have a separate offline database created to manage your offline database. So you'll have a separate channel database group just to maintain offline database, right? And it's not necessarily like you're just going to have one. There's be multiple criteria that you need to think about when you have to go ahead and plan for, hey, how I'm going to handle my offline databases and how many databases that I need to have. There are different criteria, and it's primarily based on the customer business use case and customer data that you're going to deal with, which decides in terms of how many offline database groups that you're going to maintain there. In nutshell, in general, we recommend you to have as minimal as possible because we don't want you to generate more data frequently. And if there's a business need that puts you to add more channel database groups, you can go ahead and create them. Now let's quickly jump on to next one, where we wanted to talk about some of the features from a feature management perspective, right? The first one is enabling the POS offline database compression, which, as I mentioned earlier, it enables the automated index compression of sort of the channel storage based on certain criteria, which Scott will be covering later. And the next one is basically your POS monitoring, offline monitoring. So once you enable this feature in HQ, what it does is it's going to bring in some of the latest details from your device to back office, and you can see the status monitored from back office itself. Like, for example, it provides you with the details with what is the NPOS version or Store Commerce app version that's currently running. And it's going to provide you details around what does my current database size look like from the offline database perspective, and the offline database index size, and other details like overall database size and what is the offline DB version. So all these details would be available for you at the HQ itself, and it will be very handy when you're managing multiple offline databases to ideally see what version and what is the size. It gives you a summary view from HQ itself. Now let's quickly go on to the POS synchronization features. So, or you can say the delayed download session creation, right? As I mentioned, one of the key recommendations around data generation is not to generate data for offline database until the data is required and the terminal is ready to use the offline database, right? So let's think of this scenario where a POS offline database that has been added to a relevant channel database groups inherits all the existing download sessions, and since the last data synchronization has happened, and you have new POS instances that have offline created, and a full synchronization hasn't occurred for quite some time now, and only few scheduler jobs have actual changes every 20 minutes. Like, you can take it as an example of pricing discounts or other tables which can be updated more often for enabling your operations, day-to-day operations. In this scenario, up to 2 million download sessions are immediately generated and must be applied regardless of whether the newly created terminals are activated and capable of applying this data to the offline DBs. So even at the best of times, this type of exceptional data generation is large and it's going to affect the overall performance. In worst scenario, it's going to severely affect your environment performance, and it can put you in an outage situation, which we clearly want to avoid. So we highly recommend you to either have a dummy channel database group, that is a group that isn't associated with any distribution schedule, and you assign that to a newly generated terminals, or set the POS offline synchronization option for the offline profile to yes at the offline profile level in the HQ. By setting this to yes, you stop the data generation for anything that uses the offline profile. Therefore, the data generation can occur only when it is required instead of constantly and consistently getting generated, and only when the system is most available to do it, right? That's the scenario it's going to go ahead and create. Another place where you can do the POS of the data sync is the channel database level. In our case, it's going to be offline channel database, right? So think of this scenario where you have seasonal offline sale, right? So you have a store which has 10 terminals configured and has 2 terminals which is active throughout the year, and remaining 8 terminals are active for a given particular season. So we don't want to generate the data for all these 8 terminals throughout the year. In that case, you can have a separate offline DB for this season and disable the synchronization, which way it will not generate the data throughout the year. And for the for those 8 terminals, and for the remaining 2 terminals, which is not part of this database group, it's going to do the data synchronization for your normal day-to-day operations. So that would continue, and you can segregate it and maintain it separately. Now there's another option of filtering the records. The other configuration we want to really talk about is the filtering of records at the channel schema level. As of today, we have 2 filters that we have already enabled. One is filtering the shared customer data. The other one is filter inventory dimensions for your license plate. By setting this, we're just going to talk about this one filter shared data to yes. So by setting this flag, yes, you're going to flag all the customer data in the shared table. And this setting works only for the standard Microsoft created tables and not for the custom created tables. So you need to ensure you have your right tables, and you need to monitor if there are any extensions which needs to be taken care of there. When you set this option to yes, you will receive a message, a warning message on top, which ideally says like this will remove the customer data from the records and channel this data distribution only. And all scheduled jobs that contains customer data also need to be marked to skip offline synchronization. This is just a message which is intended as a reminder that you need to exclude these data from the offline database as well. That we'll cover in a while, where you can set those options, right? We'll cover in the next upcoming slides. A small example I wanted to talk about when it comes to filtering is you can think of a scenario where you have our third-party table, which is used both for your customers as well as your worker employee table, right? So if you set the filter share customer data tables to yes, all the customer records at the row level are flagged to indicate that they should not be synced to the offline database. And when you exclude this from the offline database, you can set it up at the sub job level or scheduler job. All the customer data will be excluded from synchronization to the offline database as well. So that's one of the key things that you need to keep in mind when you are going to set this flag there. Now let's quickly jump on to cleanup and the exclusions, right? So cleanup irrelevant master data is something we want you to look into and test and enable it, right? So what it does is it kind of performs a store procedure, which strips the master data after each CDX download session is executed. The step deletes unnecessary records that were created in the package generation, but not necessary for the offline functionality for that specific device as a member of specific store. So this feature is going to assist you in minimizing the data stored in offline database. A smaller database can assist in performance and minimize size issues if you're using an express version of SQL. So this is something that we highly recommend you to test and use it in your production, right? Test it in sandbox and use it in production if you have to be clear on that. On the scheduler job page, so there is a exclude from database, right? Exclude from the offline database that I talked about. You can set this from 2 different places. One is at the scheduler job level, and the other one is a scheduler sub job level. So if you set it at the scheduler job, set to yes, it will stop all generated data packages from the job from being synced to the offline database. So if the full data sync command is run for the executed job from the channel database page, the relevant tables in the offline database will be emptied. Whereas if you set it up at the scheduler sub job level, what it does is it's going to stop the associated table for any job that contains its sub job from being synchronized to the offline database. For example, the channel database SQL table, the third-party table is synchronized by 3 different scheduler jobs. Therefore, if you exclude the third-party table, you stop its data being synchronized to the offline database by all 3 jobs if you set this at the scheduler sub job. So again, this is just an example to have a better understanding. We don't recommend you to exclude this third-party table, as it is critical for staff-related data that's stored in the offline database. With that, I'm just going to hand it over back to Scott to take us through the SQL Express installation. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Harish. Okay, so now we're going to walk through SQL Express installation. Right, SQL Express is a full, complicated product with many options, and so we want to give you guidance on what's needed to support the POS Offline Database. So both the MPOS and Store Commerce applications support offline, and those applications installers expect SQL to be installed already, available with specific configurations when you run the installer. They have prerequisite checks. So when we install, you're going to want to use SQL Express with advanced services because we need full text search, and that's only available in that edition. You need to install with mixed mode authentication. That's a change from past POS where we allowed just the Windows auth. And then we do need the PowerShell for SQL. The good thing is this is included in the installation of the database engine, so you probably won't have to think about that component. It'll come automatically. Now we do have two kind of best practices here. One is only install the required components for the device's purpose. Right? What this means is you can install the SQL runtime and tooling on development machines, but on test and production machines, you should really only be installing the SQL runtime. This limits the attack surface on those machines in production, and you want to, of course, be testing the same configuration that you're going to deploy in production. And then the second one is, when installing, we recommend using a configuration file for test and production installations. You can generate the configuration file by running the installer and making your selections. And we have I'm going to show a demo for that in just a moment. The last one there is allowing connections through firewall for your SQL ports. So you may need to remotely administer all of these instances of SQL Express, or you might have other applications that use the SQL Express. And that's fine, but if you do have to allow connections through the firewalls, make sure that you limit who and what applications can access that data. So now let's take a look at a demo of generating the configuration file. Hi. Now we're going to walk through creating the configuration INI file for installing SQL from the command line. So first, we go ahead and download our version of SQL Express. Now this file that's downloaded is really just a hook to go and get the full install. We can see it was dropped in downloads. So when we run this file, it's going to prompt us, do we want to run the install or download media? So in order to generate the configuration file, we have to download media. And it's important that we download the Express Advanced because we need full text search. So we'll go ahead, download that. So once that's downloaded, we can run this one by clicking on it, choose a place to extract it. So this is a self-extracting executable. Once this is extracted, now we have to run the setup program from a command prompt. You need to run it this way in order to generate the INI file that you use later in install. Now, it'll likely kick off the install. You need to exit out of this because it wasn't launched from the command line and it won't record your choices. So now, from a command prompt, we're going to switch into that extracted directory, and we need to run setup.exe with two parameters, UI mode normal and action install. what this does is it runs the installer, but it records all of your choices into a configuration file. So we'll go through this and choose defaults for the most part. SQL Express, accept the license rule. I'm going to keep going through the wizard. So one of the things that we talked about is only installing the components that you need. So I'm going to treat this like a production install. So I'm not going to install extra components. I'm just going to install the full text and SQL database services. Just accept the defaults for the locations. So we'll take the default SQL Express name. It's important that we install with mix mode. Point of sale needs mix mode. So this is given a summary of what it's going to do. And here's where we get the configuration file location. And at this point, we're actually going to cancel and not run the actual install because we want to run the install. We want to test it from the command line. Okay, now that we have the configuration file, let's take a look at it. So there's a couple key things we want to change in the configuration file. We're going to add the license term parameter, and then one of these two will probably be true. Quiet is no UI, and quiet simple shows the UI, but it's not interactive. And then if you set one of these to true, you have to not use the UI mode parameter. So we comment that one out. So we can see I've done those changes to the file already. There's that one, the license term, and simple quiet true so that we can watch it run. Now the command we're going to run is the same setup.exe, but now we're going to pass it the configuration file parameter, and I'm passing it a second parameter, which is the SA password that I want to use when I create the server. I'm not putting this in the INI file because it's never a good practice to put clear text passwords in text files. So we'll start this up and watch it run through. And so you can see I can't choose anything. It's just there for me to know that it's working. We'll come back in a few minutes when it's done. And when it finishes, we should be ready to install point of sale with offline mode. And there we go, we finished the install in silent mode. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick recap on what we saw. So we downloaded the installer, and we actually then extract the redistributable for SQL Express. Then we ran the setup.exe with parameters so that we can capture our choices and save them in a configuration file. Then you have to edit that configuration file and set a few things. The UI mode and the license terms are not set likely the way you want them. And then when we're ready to actually install on a device, run the setup.exe with the configuration file parameter. Once you have this configuration file and you've tested it, we recommend treating it like code. Check it into your DevOps and maintain it, right? So that all your future device installations follow the same settings, right? It'll save you time in the long run having to troubleshoot user error when a user forgets to use mix mode or they typo a password, right? They or other settings, right? So that was the SQL Express installation. I'm going to now hand it over to Harish for a walkthrough of the POS installation.
Scott. So from a POS installation perspective, I would like to start off with some of the installation parameters. So I'm not going to run through all the parameters that we have, but some of the key parameters that we generally use when it comes to StoreCommerce app installation. First things first, we do need to use the install command, and post which there are parameters like install offline, which is what we're trying to achieve today, which ideally helps you to deploy the offline version of POS along with deploying the offline database, right? Now, along with that, another key parameter is your SQL Server name. Specifying the SQL Server name is key. If you don't specify it, it's going to by default take the default instance and move forward. But if there is a need for you to specify it explicitly, you can go ahead and specify. In the demo that we are doing today, we kind of used a named instance there where we are pointing out StoreCommerce app to connect to a particular named SQL Server instance there. And we also talk about the retail server URL, which is again key. Specifying this, the default retail server URL at the time of installation would ideally help you prevent the details to be specified at the time of activation. So if you don't specify the parameter, the user will be prompted to enter the retail server URL during the device activation manually. So you can skip this by providing retail server URL. And the other one we wanted to talk about is around the help. This is one of the key parameters I would say, because this is kind of going to help you to understand what are the different parameters that we use. It's not the limited list that we have. This bunch of other parameters which you can utilize as well. So it's going to provide you details in terms of the different parameters that you can utilize when you're installing the StoreCommerce app and what is the usage of it, right? So it's going to give those details for you. Now, without taking much time, I wanted to get into a quick demo in terms of how you can do an offline POS installation. But if you can move to the next one.
Now that we have seen how to install SQL DB, which is one of the key prerequisites for the point of sale device to work in offline mode, let's quickly see how you can install the point of sale with offline enabled to it. There are different ways to install point of sale with offline. You can either use tools like SCCM or Intune if you plan to do a mass installation or deployment, or you can do a manual installation using PowerShell script. For our demo, we are going to see how you can manually install a POS with offline enabled. So first things first, we wanted to go ahead and see if we have the installers or StoreCommerce app installer available. So I have the local version of exe available with me. I'm just going to pick up the location, and then I already have the PowerShell script, PowerShell when opened in administrator mode. So I'm just going to navigate to a location where I have the installer. So now that I have the installer location, I'm just going to use the command that I have asked us to go ahead and install the POS in offline mode. So you could see that there are a bunch of parameters we have used here, like the install offline, which is what we are trying to achieve here, where it will help us to install POS with offline mode enabled. And you could see we have specified the SQL Server name or SQL Server instance, which is installed in my local machines that the StoreCommerce app uses in the offline mode. If you don't specify this parameter, the installer will use the default instance which is available in your SQL server, and it will move forward with that. And you'll also see that we are passing the trust SQL Server certificate parameter in order to trust the SQL Server certificate when a connection is established to SQL Server. To help avoid security risk, we should never use this parameter in production deployments. By default, the SQL Server certificate is entrusted. There are several other parameters which you can utilize based on the requirements that you have. The details of the parameters are available in the docs that we have shared earlier in the presentation. Now I'm going to initiate the installation, and we will monitor the progress of it. You can see that the installation is already in progress. We do have several steps already executed, and now we are waiting for the database deployment to initiate. So this would take a minute or so for the installation to complete from a POS perspective. So we can continue to monitor to see the installation here. And as you could see that the installation is complete, all the necessary steps are complete, and the POS installation is complete. I'll just go back to my desktop. I could see the Store Commerce app is installed, and it's good to go ahead and activate and move forward.
Yeah, with that, we could see how we can go ahead and install. So for this demo, we kind of went ahead and did manual installation. But as we mentioned, you can definitely use the tools like SCCM or Intune or any third-party mass deployment tools, which can help you with the silent installation. With that, I'm handing it back to Scott to take us through on the database size management. What do you, Scott?
Thank you, Harish. So as most of you are probably aware, SQL Express has a 10 gigabyte file limit. And we've heard often from customers that they reach that size or they get close to that size. So here are some strategies for keeping your data size down below that limit. First, in all versions after 2016 SP1, compression is available for the SQL Express databases. So you can, and in version 10.0.29 and higher, we've actually enabled automated index compression, and I'll cover that feature in detail in a minute, but that's one of the options available. Alternatively, we do have documentation in our CDX best practices for how to do table and index compression yourself if you want more control over it or want to also add it to the tables. And a little antidote I had a customer with a database, offline database sizes around 9 gigabytes. And when they tried to apply one of our regular updates, they were actually having problems where the update process was kicking the database size over 10 gigabytes and the update was failing. So they went ahead and used the guidance for our CDX in our CDX documentation to apply table and index compression. They saw their databases go from around 9 gigabytes to 3 gigabytes. And one of the crucial things that we made sure they did, and they did, was to test the performance, right? It's not going to help if you turn on all the compression, but it's then very slow to use point of sale in offline mode. So when they tested the performance, they saw the scan time for the first 20 items reduced only by a few seconds. So they determined that was an acceptable degradation in offline for the space savings that they got out of using compression. And then was mentioned earlier, you can separate the CDX data groups for offline databases that then allow and use those options for excluding data, right? So you can exclude subjobs and jobs, as Harish mentioned earlier, and that's been available since 10.0.13. That feature also, we like to point out, can reduce your risk of exposing customer data, right? If you don't send customer data to all of these offline databases, then customer data is in less places to be exposed. Let's take a deeper look at that automated offline database index compression. So this is new, just came out this fall. There's a few configuration settings. So it's behind a feature flag. You have to enable the POS Offline Database compression feature. And we strongly recommend you set store hours. So if you set the store hours, then the feature will honor those and not run during open hours. And then you need to run the 1070 distribution schedule to put these settings in those offline databases. So once it's enabled, what the feature does is it goes and looks for indexes that are larger than 100 megabytes or larger than 1% of the total database size. We'll develop a list of the large indexes, and then we go down that list, and any of the indexes in the list that are not already compressed, that are non-clustered indexes, we'll go ahead and apply compression to those. And then when that index is done, we wait for a period of time, pause, and then check the list again. If there's still entries, we go pick the next one and compress it. And then when they're all done, it'll pauses for longer. If the list is empty, it pauses for longer and waits. Like I said, it'll keep doing this outside of store hours if when the pause is online. So that's kind of the details on that new feature. We think that'll help customers keep their size down without them even having to do their own special scripting for SQL. Last one topic we have planned to cover is ongoing maintenance of offline databases. Right, so now you have all these SQL Express instances spread throughout your enterprise. So you can either manage them remotely via SSMS or locally with the SQL command utility. So you have to think about backing up the database. Do you need to back it up or not? And then performance tuning. And you might think, well, it's offline databases, all their data is refreshed from headquarters. Why would I need to back it up? And I'll have another kind of customer story to convey. So a customer had a custom integration. They ran it at night, and it unfortunately had corrupted their category hierarchy. And then their regular sync jobs from headquarters pushed all of that data to all the channels. And with the corrupted product hierarchy, they couldn't sell anything in point of sale. And it had pushed to all the databases. And so it took them hours to recover from that. They had to fix the data and push it out again. Had they had an in-store offline database backup process, right, with a restore procedure, that's the key. If you're doing this, right, you have to make sure you can use it. They could have restored, the local offline database, in minutes, and then back up and selling with yesterday's configuration, right? So that's a good use case for what we would want to have those local in-store backups. Database performance tuning. So updating statistics and indexes, those things typically a DBA would schedule them with SQL Agent, but SQL Agent is not available with SQL Express. So you have to find other ways to do this. And so what I want to point out here is there's a great open source solution. It's called SQL Server Maintenance Solution. It's available on GitHub, and it's basically SQL scripts, and it has backup and it has performance tuning updates. You can run the whole thing, or you can use bits of it, like just the backup or just the performance. And included in our links resources is a pointer to it and a pointer to a post that shows how you can use those scripts with the SQL CMD utility, and that allows you to make it work with SQL Express, right? So you could use Windows Task Scheduler, schedule these scripts to run using SQL CMD on a regular basis. I think it's a great solution. There's a lot of enterprises, large enterprises, using it. And it's the great thing about it is open source, right? And so you can continue to have that SQL Express solution that you don't have to pay for every instance, type of thing. So that is the end of our prepared content. We now wanted to make sure there was some time for questions and answers, and I think there's been a lot published. Harish or Jared, are there any that we want to call out specifically?
Scott, I think I have a bunch of questions that I wanted to call out. The first one is, what are the risks to enabling these features, or the list of features that we talked about, and can they be disabled again once they are enabled? Jarad, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And I hinted at it a little bit in the published section, but I'd love to speak to it more. The dashboard, for example, for register offline status, no risks whatsoever. Turn it on. That's the be all end all of it. Absolutely turn it on, because it has nothing but potential value there, and we are continuing to put in effort to try to improve it as well. The performance-based switching is a crucial one to talk about, as it does have performance focus in mind, which means it does have business-centric solutions in mind. So in scenarios where your network might degrade as opposed to just turn off, in scenarios where you can't validate throughput properly, in scenarios where your uptime can be repeatedly flipping as opposed to just on or off. There's a variety of scenarios there where performance-based switching has direct impact and value, as opposed to scenarios where you're extremely high on uptime. It's usually either on or off. There are reasons why performance-based switching isn't as valuable, where you'd instead rather it just be a pass or fail and have that switch automatically. And this also comes down to things like how frequently you have retry logic and such as well. Lastly, the offline database compression, which is one of the newer features out in .29. I have no personal reason why you should ever turn it off or not have it on. I think that it has nothing but value from what I've seen. From what we've tested internally, performance has no noticeable difference, and I make the word noticeable very specific, as there is in some scenarios, I think we saw a 1% degradation in performance in terms of time, which amounted to, I want to say it was 8 milliseconds. Not 8 seconds or anything like that, but milliseconds, which is not noticeable by the human eye. So it heavily, of course, would be matter of fact in that sense of whether or not that performance is so critical to you. But in my personal opinion, it absolutely should be on as well.
Great, thanks, Jarad. And the second question is there a minimum version of POS or store commerce that is required for these features to be supported in POS? I know you kind of brushed up on the chat about it. You want to talk more about it?
Yep, sure. I hinted at that as well, and it's also showcased in our documentation. I believe it's .20 for most of these things. I'm trying to verify performance degradation in my email right now to actually make sure that I'm not crazy, because it might have actually been a little later than .20. But the offline database compression is .29, and we specifically pushed for .29 as we actually created the feature all the way in, I think, .31, if I recall. But we knew that there were a variety of customers who were only going to be able to get .29 for the holidays, so we pushed really hard to backport it and get it all the way back to .29. So hopefully enough folks have been able to uptake that.
Okay, great. So as we speak, there's a couple of questions on the chat. Like one is, could you please show a way to turn the performance-based offline switch? I think we had it in the feature management in the deck, one of the features. So as part of the deck, we have it there, like the POS seamless offline for performance degradation there. I hope that answers your question. And there's one more question, Jarad, like where to find the forms and steps.
And I was wondering exactly what this question meant. I'm presuming that it's talking about documentation and stuff. Exactly what Scott's showing here. There's resource links at the end of this, which you will also get as a PDF as a function of the recording as well. So you will have these links. You can, of course, search for them. Also, CDX related concepts, offline related concepts for Dynamics 365 Commerce. You'll find them in docs.microsoft.com. So they do exist. They are there. I try to be fairly specific about the forms necessary, the steps necessary. If you don't see what you want, please go to these articles and make a note. Actually put in a comment. Those comments come directly to me, usually in the form of a bug to try to address. And in kind of batch mode, we'll try to make updates across various documentation. So hopefully that will resolve it.
I'll reiterate Jared's comment there. That's the mode I use when I want to get documentation fixed. It's actually very effective. It goes to the feature owner that owns the doc, and they get a bug. So I can report that it works well.
Right. And there's another question that we have in chat. Is there a feature to archive or clean up transactional data? For example, the retail transaction tables. Jarad, you want to take this one?
I'm so glad you grabbed that one, Harish. So there absolutely is. And I apologize, I don't have the link offhandedly. I did not think it was going to come up. So that's on me. But we did create let me preface first. The number one thing that can increase size in our tables right now is our payment blobs. As a function of, especially with Audion, the ability to effectively store the concept of that payment as a token, to be able to quickly perform returns if necessary or reference as necessary, those can potentially add up very quickly in size. So especially customers who have been with us for a long period of time, that starts becoming terabytes potentially. So we do have a purge and archive feature for that payment blob specifically, and that is getting enhanced over time to be transaction star related, to be overarchingly larger and better. Now that said, strictly we're focused around keeping it off the CSU as much as possible. So that also goes to your retention policy of how long you keep transactions on your CSU. Normally, that should not be longer than your return period. If your return period stick 30, 60, 90 days, whatever the case may be, it should be that. And preferably, the shorter the better. Because obviously, the smaller the size of a database, usually the faster the performance of that database. So keeping it streamlined is good, and that doesn't remove the transaction or anything. It simply puts it to headquarters so that after a period of time, you would have to then reference it as a real-time call as opposed to on the CSU.
I want to call out one kind of nuance there, Jarad.
Please.
Since we're talking about offline databases mostly. So with what you just said, so when a POS is offline and it conducts transactions and has the payment blob that you talked about, when it goes online, the transactions moved to the channel database with the CSU, and it's actually removed from the offline database. Is that correct?
Apologies. Walk me through it one more time.
Yep, that's okay. On the transaction side, so with the offline database, when I conduct transactions in the offline database, when the point of sale comes back online, those transactions are automatically moved up to the channel database and they're removed from the offline database.
Correct. We actually validate that the move has occurred to CSU and gotten the handoff, and then we purge.
Yep. Then that kind of talks to another question that came up about data retention and size control in the offline database. So, so the data, the ongoing data in your offline databases is only your headquarters data. As we just described, the transactions, they'll occur, but then they get removed the next time you come online. The headquarters data is maintained at the current state. So if it'll have all of the current products. So if you remove products from your assortments, then they get removed from the channel database and the offline databases. So the data retention there is everything that's current. As long as you're kind of keeping your data definitions current in headquarters, then that flows down to both the channel and the offline database. Next question, one of you two think it's an important one?
There are a couple of questions I see there, Scott. Like, I think commenters, I think you said you should never use option to trust the self-signed SQL certificate in production. Is this official recommendation to buy a certificate for each install?
It's not a recommendation to buy a certificate, first off, period. We will never make that a official recommendation across potentially thousands of point of sale. That would be a little on the crazy side, especially for scenarios where you don't have a domain on said point of sale. It is possible to trust that certificate, whether it be self-signed or otherwise. You can generate it in such a manner that it is considered quote unquote secure and can be trusted. These are things that you can research just by searching online, but obviously we can try to find some links for you guys as well. Scott, if you had anything else?
Nope.
So as much as I'd love to put that into an answer, I'll just publish the question and hope that people hear it. Another one that came up was, what is the typical switching time from online to offline once the performance-based offline switching is turned on? That is a phenomenal question. I'm so glad somebody asked, because we didn't really go over it in chat in terms of what that logic was. We do take what's called a slice. We slice approximately 3 to 5 times on that point of sale at an hour per slice to validate what type of performance we're seeing while online. That gives us kind of a benchmark that we can create a fuzzy logic around in terms of what the minimum and maximum is that we see. And then we've got some metrics currently that just say approximately about 20% offset, that if it goes over these limits, let's go ahead and do performance-based switching and flip off. So generally speaking, we tell customers after about a day of full transacting, that's when usually the performance-based switching will function appropriately. If you just turn it on and immediately try, it's not going to work. It has to have time to actually learn. If you're trying to do this in a test scenario, the easiest way is run about 3 transactions per hour. Do 3 transactions real quick, wait an hour, do 3 transactions real quick, rinse, repeat. Do that 3 to 5 times to verify that the performance-based switching has had time to slice and get those metrics so that you can actually validate it and test. Try to hit these as we go here, I guess. We had issues when testing the payment history purge batch functionality. Who can we speak to on this? This is the archive credit card transaction data. If you have a solution architect, absolutely connect with them. You can create a support request, and that will likely come to the team anyway. We had tested this very, very deeply because we were so incredibly worried about any issues whatsoever. So if you do see the problems with that, please reach out. Support requests, especially because we do want that to be showcased that there is a bug, there is an issue, and we certainly wouldn't want other people to run into it. So if you do have issues with the archive credit card transaction data, please connect with us.
I think there I'm going to give him a moment to do his sign off. I want to say a big thank you to all the attendees and all the questions. Ideas portal and feedback on the documentation are both great places to get feedback to us. And Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. Thank you in advance for your participation. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be made available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters today and to you, our audience, for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of the day ahead.